You will never build true masculinity until you face this. Carl Jung. Every man carries a secret he'll never admit to his friends, his family, or even himself. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the dark parts of who you are that you've been running from your entire life. Here's the problem. The harder you run, the weaker you become. Because true masculinity isn't about being perfect. It's about facing the monster you've been hiding from. And that monster, it's you. The mask you wear every day. Let me paint you a picture. You wake up, look in the mirror, and put on your game face. Confident, strong, in control. You walk into work, into social situations, into relationships wearing this mask of who you think you should be. Jung called this the persona, the character you perform for the world. But here's what Jung discovered that'll blow your mind. That mask isn't making you stronger. It's slowly killing the real you. Because while you're busy performing this perfect version of masculinity, never showing weakness, never admitting fear, never revealing insecurity, there's another version of you growing in the shadows. Jung called it the shadow self, and it contains everything you've rejected about yourself. Every time you felt scared but acted tough, that fear went into the shadow. Every moment of vulnerability you buried, shadow. Every insecurity you covered up with false confidence, shadow. Every cruel thought you pushed away because good men don't think like that. All of it piling up in your psychological basement. What Jung saw that others missed. Jung wasn't some armchair philosopher talking theory. This man dove deep into the human psyche and discovered something terrifying. The parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge don't disappear. They get stronger. He studied successful men, confident men, leaders, and found the same pattern over and over. The more perfect their public image, the more chaos lurked beneath. The more they denied their darkness, the more it controlled them from the shadows. Think about it. How many strong men have you seen completely fall apart when life gets real? How many confident leaders crumble the moment they face genuine criticism? How many guys who seem to have it all together explode with rage over the smallest things? That's the shadow erupting. That's what happens when you spend years shoving your authentic self into the darkness. The shadow's revenge. Here's where it gets darker. Your shadow doesn't stay hidden forever. It finds ways to leak out, usually at the worst possible moments. You know that friend who's always calm and collected until one day he completely loses it over something minor? Shadow eruption. You know that guy who preaches about respect and kindness but treats waiters like garbage? His shadow is showing. You know that man who talks about being strong and independent but becomes a needy, desperate mess the moment a woman shows interest? His shadow's in control. Jung discovered that the shadow operates like this. The more you deny it, the more power you give it. The more you pretend those dark parts don't exist, the more they influence your behavior without you even knowing it. It's like having a demon living in your basement that you refuse to acknowledge. You think ignoring it makes you pure, but really it's just getting stronger, angrier, and more determined to take control. Why just be positive is destroying men. Society tells men to be positive, confident, successful. Fake it till you make it. Don't show weakness. Real men don't cry. Focus on your goals and ignore the negativity. Jung would call this psychological suicide. Because when you deny the shadow, you don't just lose your dark parts, you lose your power, your authenticity, your ability to be genuinely strong. You become a hollow shell performing masculinity instead of living it. Real strength isn't about being perfect. It's about being whole. And you can't be whole while pretending half of yourself doesn't exist. Jung said something profound. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Translation: you don't become a real man by pretending to be perfect. You become a real man by facing your imperfections head-on. The integration process. So how do you face your shadow? How do you integrate these dark parts without letting them destroy you? First, you stop running. You stop pretending you're this perfect version of masculinity. You get brutally honest about who you really are, the good and the ugly. Ask yourself the hard questions. What am I afraid of that I've never admitted? What insecurities do I hide behind confidence? What thoughts do I have that I'm ashamed of? Where do I feel weak but pretend to be strong? What parts of myself do I judge and reject? Jung called this shadow work, the process of acknowledging, understanding, and integrating your rejected parts. It's not about becoming those negative traits. It's about accepting that they're part of you, so they stop controlling you from the darkness. When you acknowledge your fear, it stops controlling you through false bravado. When you admit your insecurities, you stop overcompensating in destructive ways. When you face your anger, you can channel it productively instead of exploding unexpectedly. But here's where most men get this wrong. They think shadow work means wallowing in their darkness or using it as an excuse for bad behavior. I'm just being authentic to my shadow. No, that's not integration. That's indulgence. Real shadow work is about conscious choice. It's about saying, yes, I have the capacity for cruelty, but I choose kindness. Yes, I feel fear, but I choose courage. Yes, I have destructive impulses, but I choose to build. The difference between a man controlled by his shadow and a man who's integrated his shadow is consciousness. The controlled man acts out his darkness unconsciously. The integrated man acknowledges his darkness and chooses his light. The dark truth about good men. Let's talk about something uncomfortable. The men who pride themselves on being good guys. Always nice, always supportive, never aggressive, never selfish. They're often the most dangerous. Why? Because they've pushed so much into their shadow that they don't even know what's down there. They genuinely believe they're incapable of cruelty, manipulation, or selfishness. And that blindness makes them capable of incredible harm while maintaining their self-image as the good guy. Jung saw this pattern repeatedly. The most controlling men often believed they were being protective. The most manipulative men thought they were being helpful. The most emotionally abusive men convinced themselves they were just passionate. When you don't own your capacity for darkness, you can't see when you're acting it out. You become unconsciously cruel while consciously believing you're kind. This is why Jung insisted that becoming conscious of your shadow isn't optional if you want to be genuinely good. You can't choose the light if you don't acknowledge the darkness you're choosing against. The price of perfection. Let me tell you what Jung discovered about perfectionist men, the ones who seem to have it all figured out, who never make mistakes, who always know what to say and do. They're exhausted. They're living in constant fear. They're one mistake away from complete breakdown. Because maintaining a perfect image requires enormous energy. You have to constantly monitor yourself, edit yourself, perform yourself. You can never relax. You can never just be human. And here's the cruel irony. The harder you try to be perfect, the more imperfect you become, because perfectionism is rooted in fear, insecurity, and the desperate need for approval. All shadow material. The man trying to be perfect is actually being controlled by his imperfections. He's not transcending his weaknesses. He's being enslaved by them. Jung's path is different. Instead of trying to eliminate your flaws, you integrate them. You own them. You make peace with the fact that you're human, which frees you to actually grow instead of just perform growth. The shadow's gifts. Here's what nobody tells you about shadow work. Your shadow contains your greatest gifts. That anger you've been suppressing. It contains your passion, your drive, your ability to stand up for what matters. That selfishness you're ashamed of. It contains your self-respect, your boundaries, your ability to prioritize your own needs when necessary. That arrogance you try to hide. It contains your confidence, your belief in your own capabilities, your refusal to settle for less. The shadow isn't just your bad parts, it's your rejected power. When you integrate these aspects consciously, you reclaim energy you've been wasting on suppression and performance. The most charismatic, genuinely powerful men aren't the ones who've eliminated their dark sides. They're the ones who've made friends with their darkness and learned to channel it constructively. The paradox of true masculinity. Here's the paradox Jung discovered. The moment you stop trying to be perfectly masculine, you become genuinely masculine. When you admit your fears, you develop real courage. When you acknowledge your weakness, you find authentic strength. When you face your shadow, you stop being controlled by it. The men who seem most genuinely powerful aren't the ones with perfect images. They're the ones who've integrated their darkness. They know their capacity for weakness, for fear, for cruelty. And because they know it, they can choose strength, courage, and kindness. They don't perform masculinity. They embody it. What this means for your life: stop performing. Stop pretending. Stop running from the parts of yourself that make you uncomfortable. Your shadow isn't your enemy, it's your unintegrated power. Those dark thoughts, those fears, those insecurities you've been hiding, they contain energy, strength, and authenticity that you've been denying yourself. When you face your shadow, you don't become darker. You become complete. You become real. You become the kind of man who doesn't need to prove anything because he knows exactly who he is. Light and dark, strength and weakness, all of it owned and integrated. Jung spent his life studying the human psyche, and his conclusion was clear. The path to authentic masculinity doesn't go around your darkness. It goes straight through it. Your shadow is waiting. It's been waiting your whole life for you to stop running and finally face what you've been hiding from. And once you do, once you integrate those rejected parts of yourself, you'll understand what real strength looks like. It's not perfect, it's not pretty, but it's real. And real beats fake every single time. You want to build true masculinity? Stop building a perfect image and start building a complete self. Your shadow is your roadmap. Now you know what Jung discovered about authentic masculinity, but understanding the shadow is just the beginning. If you want to know how to actually integrate your darkness and transform it into power, this video right here breaks down the exact process Jung used with his patients.